Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Baccalaureate service. I am so delighted to be speaking to you today. Unfortunately, I'm speaking to an empty church. I know that you would love to be here, and we would so love for you to be here with us. But circumstances dictate otherwise, and so we are going to do this. And we look forward to honoring you and celebrating your baccalaureate today. It was Mother's Day, the year 2000. And my son said these words to me. Dad, I tried to kill myself. Now those words broke my heart. And yet, at the same time, those very words filled me with joy. Class of 2020, you have had a senior year that has been cut short. I think Charles Dickens says it best in his wonderful novel called A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. Seniors, you have missed out. Your last slip and slide came and went. I still remember your freshman year and the delight in your faces as you were sliding down the hill in front of the cafeteria. The picnic, your last one, you missed. The spectacular refrigerator box crashes. The spring concert, your last chance to perform as an Ocean Air or a West Wind or a choir member. Flower Vespers, that last opportunity to make things right with someone or to affirm that friend who had been so important in your life. Friday night consecration and your first chance to march in with graduation robes. Baccalaureate and the opportunity to have friends and family from all over the world fill this church and have a church service that is all about you. Class night, and the time you had to reveal who you really are as you march into Baker with friends and family, accompanied by the music that defines you. I can still remember 1997 and my daughter being carried in on class night as we were saying, "You are not worthy, we are not worthy, we are not worthy." It was a wonderful moment for Shannon, and I am so sorry that you missed that class night. And finally, graduation, where you get your diploma and stand on senior stage looking out at a future while your parents mistakenly celebrate the fact that they think they are done parenting. March 13 was the date that many of you remember. As PJ announced, we would be extending our spring break, and within a few weeks, we all learned that our year together was over. Noel Hendrickson broke my heart when I read this quote. My school was making me leave, like a suspension, but I hadn't done anything wrong. The crisis has forever changed your life, but it is more than that. I know this class. I know that people are scared and your heart aches for them. I know that this class sees things with compassion for the world. I know that family members are losing jobs and the future is anything but certain, but your faith stands strong. Little things like leaving your house and going out to eat or just over to a friend's house have been taken from you, but you are still filled with hope. Approximately 100,000 people in the United States and more than 300,000 people worldwide have died. And yet you hold on to the idea that this world is not the end of our existence. The other day, as Ruthie and I were walking on campus, and that's been one of the big perks. We get to walk a lot. We came by the rock, and I saw that PJ had put up Psalms 91. Now, I remember from my schooling that Psalms 91 had something to do with an angel of the Lord encamping around or something like that. So I went home and looked it up, and I was astounded at how appropriate that text was for the crisis we are going through. It says this: "We live within the shadow of the Almighty, sheltered by the God who is above all gods. This I declare, that he alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I am trusting him. For he rescues you from every trap and protects you from the fatal plague. He will shield you with his wings. They will shelter you. His faithful promises are your armor. Now you don't need to be afraid of the dark anymore, nor fear the dangers of the day, nor dread the plagues of darkness, nor disasters in the morning." You see, folks, out of this tragedy, God can bring good. Sometimes we don't see it right away. My favorite story so far coming out of the coronavirus tragedy is this. In the 1840s, the Irish were going through an incredible famine in which hundreds of thousands, I think actually over 1 million people, died. During that time of tragedy, another poor group of people, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, were so moved by the plight of the Irish that they got together and they raised money, and they raised $170. Now again, that was a lot of money for them, but they sent their little $170 over to Ireland for famine relief. Well, fast forward to the year 2020. Native American groups have been decimated by COVID-19. The Irish don't forget. Yes, that's a shout out to you, Ella. The Irish don't forget. And as I read this, I look at the numbers, and it's so far $820,000 has been raised by the Irish to help Native Americans. It was a Thursday before Mother's Day in the year 2000. I got the phone call, and the phone call said, "We found your son. He's unconscious. He's in his room. He was in his room with a number of pill bottles laying around his head that were empty." My first reaction is he going to be okay? The answer hit me like a ton of bricks. No, we don't think so. But we need you to come as soon as you can. And so the journey started. We flew from Hagerstown, Maryland to Pittsburgh. We then caught a plane in Pittsburgh to LaGuardia, and then we took a taxi through the city of New York. And while we were in the taxi, we pulled up to a stoplight, and next to us was a bus. And on the side of the bus it said, "God is real." We got to Kennedy, we took off and flew to Madrid, and then took another plane to Valencia, where we were picked up by Matthew's favorite teacher. And she gave us his suicide note, and we read it, and our hearts broke. But she said, "He's still alive." And so we went to the hospital. He was in a medically induced coma. And we waited. And finally, after several days, they said, "We're going to try and bring him out." But we don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know if he's had brain damage, and we don't know if he's ever going to be the same person again. And so I walked in. I was all gowned up. I took his hand, and I looked in his eyes as they opened. And the first words he said to me were, "Dad, I tried to kill myself." And then the next words, "Am I okay?" Now you can see where those words were heartbreaking, and yet at the same time, you cannot even begin to imagine the celebration that I was feeling in my heart because he was able to enunciate that thought clearly. A few weeks ago, I sat with Matt by the fire as we were watching his kids play nearby. And he looked at me and said, "Dad, I am so sorry for what I put you through." And I thought about that for a moment. And my response was this. I said, "Yeah, Matt, that was perhaps the worst moment of my life. I cannot think of anything more terrible than that." And yet, on the other hand, what happened that day in Spain changed my life. You see, Spain opened my eyes to my addiction issues. And when I saw Matthew take charge of his life and his addiction issues, I said, it's time for me to do the same thing. Spain allowed me to talk with parents with an authentic voice because they knew that I knew what it was like to have trouble in my home. Spain sent me on a journey of self-exploration that changed who I was as a dad. It changed who I was as a husband, a teacher, and an overall human being. Matthew gave me a gift that day in Spain. As I was finishing up the school year this year, I gave my students an assignment. Their final test was to write their COVID-19 history. Now, I didn't want them to write the history of the disease. I wanted them to write their history. I've been able to share with my kids what it felt like as a 6-year-old during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I wish I'd have been able to write that down into words. And so I said, you guys have an opportunity to write about this and give your history. And the results were very interesting. Ashley Estes wrote the following, which moved me. On the bright side, in just first 2 weeks of March, the world had seen how healthcare workers, truck drivers, and grocery store employees have been more significant than NBA players, actors, and famous people. Our world is now improving its air, water, and land for the better. In China and Los Angeles, the smog is dying down, and the earth can finally take a break from us. We can now sit back and really appreciate all the good moments we had. When this is over, may we never again take for granted a handshake with a stranger, full shelves at stores, conversations with neighbors, a crowded theater, coffee with a friend, the stadium roaring, life itself. May we become better for each other and the earth because of the worst. Isabel Lidvik wrote, it almost seemed like a joke at that point, as if every unlikely thing I truly felt would never happen, happened. There were memes everywhere that 2020 would just keep getting crazier and crazier each month. In March, we joked around about an alien invasion for April, since January and February had been full of war scares, floods, and giant wildfires. Fortunately, it looks like we're safe from the aliens for now. They're probably self-quarantining like everyone else. Isabel Dick shared this. So obviously there's a whole lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, like death, people losing their jobs, and a whole lot of other stuff. But this pandemic has given time for the planet to take a break from people. So what do we do with this situation in our future? How do we move forward with our lives while still acknowledging the pain we are feeling? The following essay addresses this issue. It was written by my son Matthew. Yes, the one in the story. It's called Shape-Shifting. He writes, I wake up angry. I made the mistake of watching the news the night before. As I make coffee, I make things worse by checking social media and discovering a post from someone whose religious affiliations do not, in my opinion, match the callous, thinly disguised hatred they spew. I'm at my parents' house on the Santa Cruz coast with 2 little ones. And the very fact that my presence poses a risk for all of us is difficult. What happened to good old-fashioned guilt emerging from not spending enough time with your parents? That's the natural order of things, in my opinion. An hour later, my mom gets the kids started on their schoolwork for the day, and I slip out for a walk on the beach. The coastline is mostly sunny with the classic ocean breeze, seabirds roaming around in noisy gangs, little crabs scuttling about, and people occasionally passing by with partners and dogs. But despite the beauty, I'm having difficulty seeing what's around me. Instead, my mind is considering scriptural passages to throw back at the post I'd seen on Facebook. Hypocrite, I think. I'll give you a dose of your own religion. My teeth grind. I get angrier and more resentful as I walk. It gets so bad that I start envisioning assaulting a man who had recently verbally accosted my sister-in-law in a grocery store. I'm walking on the beach, but I'm not here. I don't smell that fresh, albeit slightly stinky ocean tang. I don't hear the sounds of life burgeoning around me. I don't notice the smiles of people as they pass by. I don't bask in the warm memories of growing up surfing here or the late-night fires on the beach with friends. I'm not thinking about the luxury of my kids getting to splash in the ocean tides later that afternoon, or the hordes of people out in the world who would love to be strolling in my shoes. I don't try to put myself in the position of those who are lashing out to try to understand why they might be reacting in the manner they are. Instead, I hate people for hating. I am furious with the acts of selfishness committed out of fear. Yet I myself feel violent and afraid. I think as I stop walking, nice job being a peaceful presence in the world. I realize I have to transform the anger somehow. I recall Carol, a mentor during my time as a counselor in a teen mom home close to 20 years earlier. A Nazi concentration camp survivor, her life story had been astounding, and her calm way of moving through the world nearly baffling. There had been one particularly difficult teen mom who, regardless of the nice things we'd done for her, made wild accusations of mistreatment, and while playing the victim's role, victimized others. I was both angered and mildly afraid of her. When I confessed this to Carol, she said, regardless of what happens, if you act with integrity and do not feed her rage with your own reactions, then you won't have to live with regrets. She paused thoughtfully before continuing in her slight German accent. And remember that empathizing and condoning are not the same action. I think about another mentor and friend who told me on a daily basis, I have to recall that at its core, life is impermanence and uncertainty. That the only real power I have is how I shape my response to that which I cannot control. But don't forget, that is real power. I think about how while caretaking a terminally ill spouse, I spent so much time trying to fix and control that I forgot to be present. I think about how I forgot to notice the beauty and the small gestures of kindness taking place even in the midst of medical violence. At the time, I couldn't find faith that life would ever return to a state other than suffering, yet it did. I think about the relationship between my fiancée Sherry and I, and how we work very hard on not attempting to control or change each other. Do I drive her nuts sometimes and vice versa? Yes. That's being human. Lately, she and I have felt some resentment that we are technically in the honeymoon phase of our relationship and yet have already had to face circumstances together that have driven some couples to divorce. Yet it occurs to me that rather than seeing this as being slighted by the universe, I could remember that our relationship is an incredible gift. Not so long ago, we were both alone and somewhat disillusioned as to whether this would ever change. We haven't been slighted. We've been given grace. I turn back toward my childhood home. The waves rush my feet, and I cackle as I jump back from the foam. Up ahead, I notice several uniformed men surrounding a seal I'd seen on the first leg of my walk. I'd assumed it was dead, but it's not, and the men are there to assist it back into the water. I thank them as I pass and receive friendly nods in response. 30 minutes later, I pass by a group of workers picking strawberries in a field adjacent to my parents' house. A woman looks up from her basket, and I call out in Spanish to thank her. I feel gratitude that there are people doing this hard labor and that I get to eat strawberries. She waves and smiles in response. Finally, back at home, I pick up my little girl, and rather than feeling fear that she will be hurt by the world, I think about the fact that I get to hang out with her today. Shape-shifting. I'd like to conclude my talk today by sharing a quote from Jack Darrell, who is my friend and a classmate of yours. He writes, "As my family was getting ready to go, I went up to my room to check everything one last time. While I may return one day and revisit the memories I'd made, I knew it would never be the same. Alone in the room, I took one last moment to reflect on the laughs, the smiles, the tears, the procrastination, the everything, and closed the door. It was time for this chapter to end and to begin writing the next page for what was to come. Seniors, it's time for you to write the next page, the next chapter of your history. Thank you, and may God bless you."